Right, so here's a thing about One Piece that I've always found quietly funny. In a world full of kings and governments and an actual global authority that runs most of the map, the four most powerful people alive don't hold a rank anybody handed them. They're pirates. They just took the spot. The world calls them the Four Emperors, and somehow that title has stuck around for decades, passed from hand to hand, like an heirloom nobody officially owns. Tonight we're going to wander through all of them, the ones who held it back in the day, the ones holding it now, and the tangled bit of history connecting the two. No rush at all, one emperor at a time, slow and easy, and if you drift off somewhere around the third or fourth, that's rather the point. If you like these lore rambles and want more, a subscribe helps. That's the only time I'll bring it up. So get comfortable and let's talk about the most dangerous pirates in the world in the most relaxing way I can manage. So before we get to any actual people, let's talk about the world they sit on top of, because it makes everyone we're about to meet a lot easier to picture. The map of One Piece is cut roughly in half by a strip of ocean called the Grand Line. The first half is dangerous. The second half is where the danger stops pretending. That back half has a name that always struck me as a bit cheeky given how deadly it is, the New World. And it's out there, in that stretch of chaos that the emperors live. They don't visit, they rule. That's the part I think people miss the first time round. When we say a character is one of the four emperors, it's easy to hear that as very strong pirate, full stop. But it's bigger than personal strength. Each emperor sits at the top of a sprawling network of smaller crews, allied captains, and whole islands that fly their flag. Territories, basically. An emperor doesn't just have a ship and a sword. They have borders. Islands out in the New World that answer to a pirate mark instead of a government seal, and pay for the privilege of being left alone or protected, depending on which emperor you've ended up under. It's less famous outlaw and more warlord running a country the map won't admit exists. Which brings us to the balance of the whole thing. And this is the part I find properly clever. In the world of One Piece, there are three great powers that hold everything roughly in place. On one side, you've got the world government and its military, the Marines, with their top-tier officers, the admirals doing the heavy lifting. On another side, for a long time, you had the seven warlords, pirates the government had essentially put on a leash, given legal cover to in exchange for the occasional favour. And on the third side, you've got the emperors, who answer to nobody and never have. The idea was that these three forces kept each other honest. The Marines were strong enough that no single emperor wanted to march on the world's capital for a laugh. The warlords filled in the gaps and could be pointed at whoever needed pointing at. And the emperors were terrifying enough that the government couldn't just go stomping around the New World doing as it pleased. Everybody held everybody in check. A cold sort of peace, but a peace. Here's the detail that tells you how seriously the government takes these four. What genuinely keeps the world government up at night isn't one emperor. It's the thought of two of them shaking hands. A single emperor is a catastrophe the Marines think they can weather. Two emperors deciding they like each other and pooling their fleets. That's the kind of thing that could tip the board over. So a lot of quiet effort goes into making sure that never happens, into watching for it, into stepping in early if two of them so much as end up on the same island. It's the anxiety of a government that knows exactly how thin its grip really is. And the emperors, for their part, don't much bother with each other. This is something I think gets flattened in the retelling. They aren't a team. There's no clubhouse, no group chat, no shared cause. They're not even really rivals in the sporting sense. They mostly just leave one another alone, each minding their own patch of the New World, occasionally brushing up against each other, and occasionally not. Neither allies nor enemies, as the standard phrasing goes. Four separate storms, each rotating around its own eye, and the smart move for everyone else is to stay out from under all of them. It's worth slowing down on what that protection actually looks like on the ground, because it's more interesting than big, scary pirate owns island. Out in the New World, an island can formally place itself under an emperor's flag, and in return for tribute, usually treasure or resources, or some useful goods the island produces, that island effectively buys itself a shield. The emperor's mark goes up somewhere visible, and the message to the rest of the world is simple. Touch this place, and you're touching me. And because nobody in their right mind wants an emperor's whole fury coming down on them over one raid, that mark works. Pirates who'd happily plunder an undefended island will sail right past one, flying the right flag. It's protection in the most literal, old-fashioned sense, the sort of arrangement that's half safety and half racket, depending on how kindly the emperor in question happens to rule. And the quality of that deal varied enormously depending on whose flag you were under, which is one of the more human details in the whole setup. Under a warm-hearted emperor, being a protected island could be a decent existence. You paid your tribute, you got left alone, and if someone did come for you, a very angry monster would turn up to sort it out. Under a crueler one, the same arrangement could feel a lot more like living under a boot, the tribute steep, the protection conditional, the whole thing a step away from outright ownership. Same system, wildly different experiences, all down to the temperament of the individual sitting at the top. It's a nice illustration of how personal this kind of power is in one piece. There's no bureaucracy softening the edges, no institution standing between you and the whim of one enormous personality. You're not a citizen, you're a possession, or a ward, or a friend, depending entirely on who's holding the flag and what kind of mood they're in. There's a knock-on effect to all this that's easy to miss, but matters a great deal later. When an island is under a particular emperor's protection, that island's fate is tied directly to that emperor's fortunes. So long as their patron stands, they're safe. But an emperor is not a permanent fixture, as we're about to spend the whole night discovering. And when a patron falls, every island and every smaller crew that was sheltering under them is suddenly, terrifyingly, out in the open. That's part of why the fall of any single emperor sends such a shockwave across the map. It's not just one powerful figure gone, it's an entire web of dependent places and people abruptly stripped of the shield they'd been relying on, all at once, scrambling to find a new flag before someone comes to take advantage. Hold on to that thought, because it's the quiet mechanism running under a lot of what follows. Now, how does the world rank these people? Officially, it doesn't, not with any tidy scoreboard, but there's a number that everyone uses as shorthand, and that's the bounty. Every notable pirate has a price on their head, set by the government, meant to reflect how much of a threat they pose. And emperor bounties live in a category of their own, up in the billions, in a range almost nobody else in the world ever reaches. I'll say this about bounties though, and then I'll let it go, because it's a thing the series itself keeps gently reminding you. A bounty is not a power level. It's a threat assessment, and threat is a broad word. It folds in how strong you are, yes, but also how much territory you hold, how many dangerous people follow you, how much of an insult you are to the government specifically, and how likely you are to do something about it. Two pirates of similar strength can have wildly different numbers because one of them made things personal with the wrong people. So when we get to the figures later, and some of them are enormous, hold them loosely. They tell you how scared the world is. They don't quite tell you who'd win a fight, and honestly, that gap is one of the more interesting things about how the whole system works. The word itself, since we're here. In the original Japanese, they're called the yonko, which just breaks down to 4, an emperor. 4 emperors, clean enough. There's a small quirk in the language that I always liked, which is that the same word gets used for a single one of them too. So a character can be described in Japanese as being a yonko, one of the 4, even though the word literally has 4 baked into it. It doesn't quite survive the trip into English, where you have to say one of the 4 emperors and hope nobody's counting. A tiny translation seam, the kind of thing you only notice if you go looking. But I think it's a nice little window into how these titles get worn as much as they get earned. Because that's the thread running under all of this, and it's the thing we'll keep coming back to tonight. There is no throne. There's no coronation, no crown, no ceremony where somebody hands you a sash and calls you emperor. The title is really just a consensus. It's the world's newspapers and the government's intelligence people looking at the state of the seas and going, right, these are the 4 you need to worry about now. Which means the title can shift. It has shifted. Someone falls, someone dies, someone gets dethroned in a battle halfway across the world, and a seat opens up, and sooner or later the consensus refills it with whoever's grown large enough to cast that kind of shadow. That's why the 4 emperors isn't really a fixed cast of characters. It's a role, a set of 4 chairs that different people have occupied at different times, and the story of the emperors is partly the story of who's been sitting in them, and who got up, and who sat down next. When we talk about the old guard and the new guard tonight, that's what we mean. Same 4 chairs, very different occupants, and it's worth sitting with how much weight that puts on a handful of individuals. 4 people. In a world of countless islands and millions of lives and an entire global government with fleets and fortresses, and its own godlike ruling class tucked away in the capital, the balance of the whole thing rests partly on 4 pirates who never asked to be load-bearing. They just got strong and gathered people and carved out something too big to ignore. And one day, the world looked up and decided they counted. It's a strange kind of power, the kind that arrives by reputation before it ever arrives by decree. There's one more thing I want to plant here first, because it'll matter more than once. For all their independence, the emperors aren't disconnected from the rest of the world's history. They didn't each spring up in a vacuum. A few of them go a long way back, further than the current era of the story, into a past where the seas were arranged differently, and the giants of that age were still walking around. Some of the people we'll meet tonight knew each other decades ago. Some of them served on the same ships. Some of them owe their strength or their grudges or their whole trajectory to things that happened long before anyone slapped an emperor title on them. So that's the shape of it. 4 independent monarchs of an ocean nobody fully controls, holding 1/3 of the world's power between them, feared most for what they might do together, and least likely to ever do it. Ranked by numbers that don't quite mean what they seem to. Wearing a title that has no throne and keeps changing hands. That's the job. Now let's meet the people who've done it, starting not with any single emperor, but with the crew that quietly gave the world several of them at once. Here's a fun fact that reframes a big chunk of the map once you know it. 3 of the emperors we're going to talk about tonight all came out of the same crew. Not allies who met later, not rivals who circled each other for years. Crewmates. They stood on the same deck, under the same flag, before any of them was famous. The crew was called the Rocks Pirates, and to understand how big a deal they were, you have to go back a good few decades before the main story, to a time most people in One Piece only half remember. This is before the current emperors, before the great age of piracy that the whole series takes place in, back when the world was arranged around a different set of monsters. The Rocks Pirates were led by a man named Rox D. Xebec, and by most accounts, he was something close to the worst-case scenario the world had ever produced, where a lot of pirates in this world want treasure, or freedom, or a good time, or to simply be left alone. Rox reportedly wanted the whole thing, the top, to sit above even the world government and its hidden rulers. Ambition on that scale tends to attract a certain kind of person, and the crew he assembled was a genuine murderer's row, not a tight little family, more a collection of enormous egos who could barely stand each other, held together mostly by the sheer gravity of what they were chasing. And this is the bit I love, sailing on that crew as young up-and-comers rather than the legends they'd become, were the future Whitebeard, the future Kaido, and the future Big Mom. 3 of the 4 emperors of the modern era, all learning the trade on the same doomed ship. Sort of like finding out 3 rival CEOs who now run competing empires all started in the same tiny startup that went spectacularly bust. The shared origin explains so much about how they carry themselves later, and how the world talks about that in the same breath. They weren't the only names aboard either. The Rock's crew had other heavy hitters who'd go on to their own kinds of infamy. But those three are the ones that matter for us tonight, because their paths keep braiding through the rest of the story. Now, a crew that dangerous doesn't just fade away quietly, and the Rock's pirates didn't. They came to an end on a single day, in a single place, and the name of that place has become one of those loaded phrases in One Piece lore that makes longtime fans sit up whenever it's mentioned. God Valley. What happened at God Valley is still, even now, only partly told. The series has handed out the broad strokes and kept a lot of the detail tucked away, which is very much the house style. But the broad strokes are dramatic enough on their own. The Rock's pirates were operating at God Valley, and to stop them, two of the era's other titans did something almost nobody expected. They teamed up, a marine and a pirate, sworn opposites, working side by side for one day only, because the alternative was letting Rox get what he was reaching for. The marine was a young officer named Garp, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated figures in the entire military, a man whose name gets spoken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for legends. And the pirate was Goldie Roger. That name you might know, even if you know nothing else about One Piece, because Roger is the one who'd eventually be crowned the king of the pirates. The man whose final words kicked off the whole great age of piracy the series lives in. Before all that, before the crown and the legend, he was at God Valley, fighting alongside a marine to bring down Rox. And they won. Rox D. Zebek fell at God Valley, the crew broke apart, and the day passed into that strange half-buried category of history that the world government would very much prefer stayed buried. Garp, for his role, got offered honours he famously kept turning down, which tells you something about the man we'll circle back to later. The important thing for us is what the wreckage scattered, because when a crew like that comes apart, the survivors don't retire. They go off and become the thing they were always going to become. The young monsters who'd been sailing under rocks went their separate ways, and over the following decades each of them built their own empire out in the new world. Whitebeard raised a crew that felt more like a family. Kaido built a war machine. Big Mom founded a dynasty. 3 empires, 3 completely different philosophies of what power should look like, all growing out of the same shattered starting point. That's the thing I keep turning over about the Rox connection. These 3 end up representing 3 totally opposed answers to the same question. Whitebeard's answer was, roughly, that power is for protecting the people you love. Kaido's answer was that power is the only thing that's real and everything else is weakness. Big Mom's answer was that power is family, blood and loyalty, and a table long enough to seat everyone who belongs to you. Same school, wildly different graduates. And you can draw a straight line from the ambition of that one old crew to the shape of the modern seas, because the era we watch in the main story is, in a lot of ways, just the long aftermath of God Valley still playing out. It also quietly resets how you read the current Emperor's rivalries. When Whitebeard and Kaido end up on opposite sides of things later, that's not 2 strangers. That's 2 people who knew each other as young men, who remember the same battles, who watch their captain reach too far and fall. There's history in it, old history, the kind that doesn't fully go away no matter how many decades pile on top. When one of them speaks about another, there's a familiarity underneath the menace, the tone of people who've been measuring themselves against each other for most of their lives. And there's a generational thing here that the series is very deliberate about. God Valley is where the old titans clashed, Roger and Garp and Rox, the giants of the previous age. But the era we actually follow, the one with Luffy and the modern crews, is the next turn of that same wheel. The people who were young rookies on the Rox pirates became the establishment, the terrifying old guard. And then in the main story, a new batch of rookies rises up to challenge them in turn, and some of those rookies will end up as emperors themselves. It's cyclical. The monsters of one generation are the crewmates of the last generation's monsters, and the fresh faces of the current one. The wheel keeps turning, and God Valley is one of the places you can see the whole mechanism if you stand at the right angle. I should be honest that a fair amount about God Valley and the Rocks Pirates is still deliberately vague. Oda, the author, has a long habit of dropping a huge revelation, letting it sit, and then not fully explaining it for years, sometimes a decade or more. The Rocks crew is one of those slow-release mysteries. We know they existed. We know roughly who was aboard. We know how they ended. But the full picture of what happened at God Valley, and why the world government scrubbed it so hard from the record, is still being filled in piece by piece as the story goes. So if you ever see fans getting extremely worked up about a new God Valley detail, that's why. It's a keystone that's still being set. For our purposes tonight, though, the takeaway is simple and rather satisfying. Before there were 4 emperors, there was one crew that carried several of them at once, a cradle for monsters, and when it broke, the fragments grew into empires that would define the world for the next 30-odd years. So when we go and meet Whitebeard and Kaido and Big Mum, remember that once, a long time ago, they all answered to the same captain and chased the same impossible dream. Then that dream died at God Valley, and each of them went off to build their own. Let's start with the one who built his empire out of the least likely material of all. Not fear, not conquest, family. Which brings us to the man the world eventually called the strongest alive. The thing you have to understand about Edward Newgate is that he could have had anything, and what he wanted was a family. Not a throne, not the world, not the treasure everyone else was scrambling after. A family, and that one fact more than any amount of raw strength is what makes him the one I always find myself most fond of. He came from nothing, an orphan from a place called Sphinx, a poor island out in the middle of nowhere, no parents, no name that meant anything, no head start of any kind. And from that starting point he grew into the man the world would eventually call the strongest alive. After Roger, the Pirate King, was gone, that title had already landed on Whitebeard and stayed there, the strongest man in the world. Not a boast he went around making, just a thing everyone quietly understood to be true. His power came from a devil fruit, which is worth a quick word for anyone new to how this world works. Devil fruits are cursed fruits that grant a person some strange ability at the cost of their ability to swim ever again. There are a lot of them, and most give you something useful but manageable. Whitebeard's was not manageable. It was called the Gura Gura no Mi, the Quake fruit, and it let him generate earthquakes. Not metaphorically, actual, physical earthquakes, delivered by fist. He could grab the air like it was a solid pane of glass and crack it, sending shockwaves rolling out that could tilt whole islands and throw up tidal waves. It was described, more than once, as a power capable of destroying the world if the man holding it ever decided that's what he wanted. That's the part that always stops me, the single most destructive fruit in the sea, in the hands of the one man who least wanted to destroy anything. His bounty reflected all that. It sat among the very highest ever recorded in the history of the world, second only to the Pirate King himself, a number up around 5 billion, and in a system where the bounty is a measure of how much the world fears you. That number is the government saying, out loud, that they considered him a threat on the scale of the man who conquered the entire ocean. But here's what he did with all. That fear pointed at him. Almost nothing. He wasn't out conquering. He wasn't expanding some ruthless empire. He was, mostly, sitting on his territory, keeping the people under his flag safe, and gathering to himself a crew of the lost and the unwanted. Because that was the heart of it. Whitebeard didn't call the people who followed him a crew. Not really. He called them his sons, He was Pops. Every one of them, hundreds of pirates across dozens of divisions, he treated as family, and they treated him the same way back. For a lot of them, it was the first family they'd ever had. He collected people the way other pirates collected gold, and he'd have told you cheerfully that he'd made the better trade. There's a line of his that stuck with me, the idea that in a world where he could have chased anything, the thing worth having was a family to call his own. Coming from the strongest man alive, that lands differently than it would from anyone else. Sort of like how the toughest, scariest bloke you ever met at work turns out to be the one who remembers everyone's birthday and quietly covers for people when they're struggling. The strength and the softness aren't a contradiction. The strength is what let him afford the softness. Nobody was going to test a man who could split the sky. His story, though, is a sad one, and I'll tell it gently because it's the kind that deserves a soft voice. It ended in a war. One of his sons had been captured by the world government and was set to be executed publicly as a message to the world. And Whitebeard, being who he was, did not hesitate. He took his entire fleet and every ally he had and sailed straight for the marine stronghold to get his son back. Not for treasure, not for territory, for one member of his family. The whole vast machinery of his power turned toward a single rescue. That war has a name, Marineford, and it's one of the pivotal events of the whole series, the sort of thing that splits One Piece history into before and after. I'm not going to walk you through every blow of it, because that's not what tonight is for, and honestly, the details are heavier than sleep once, but the shape of it is this. He went in knowing it might cost him everything, and it did. Whitebeard died at Marineford, on his feet by most accounts, still standing, still fighting, having given his sons the chance to escape. The strongest man in the world, brought down at the end of an era he'd more or less held up single-handedly. And his death didn't stay quiet. When a figure that large falls, the world shifts around the space he leaves. His crew scattered and struggled without him. His territories, once untouchable because they were his, suddenly looked like something you could take. And one of his own, a man who'd sailed under him for years waiting for exactly this kind of opening, made his move in the middle of that chaos. But that's a thread for later, and I'll leave it dangling gently rather than yank it. Just know that the biggest consequence of Whitebeard's death was the vacancy it created. An emperor's seat, empty for the first time in a very long time, and the scramble to fill it that followed. There's a detail about him I find quietly moving, so I'll leave you with it before we carry on. For all his power, Whitebeard was not in his prime by the end. He was old and ill, hooked up to tubes even as he fought, physically a shadow of what he'd once been. And he was still, even diminished, one of the most dangerous people alive. There's a version of the story where that's tragic, the great man fading, but I don't think he'd have seen it that way. He got the thing he actually wanted. He had a family, hundreds of them who loved him, who'd have followed him anywhere, who cried at his grave. Measured against a throne, that might not sound like much. Measured against an orphan's life on a poor little island with no name worth having, it's just about everything. He also, without ever quite meaning to, set the template that the other emperors get measured against. Because after Whitebeard, strongest man in the world became a real, spoken title. A thing people wondered about and argued over. Who's the strongest now that Pops is gone? It's a question the story keeps poking at, and every emperor we meet from here is in some sense being weighed against the memory of a man who could have ruled the world and chose to raise a family instead. Which makes a nice bridge, because there's one more figure from Whitebeard's era still standing, someone who was there at Marineford, who ended that war with a few words when it had already taken everything it was going to take. A man who never had a devil fruit at all, who's arguably the most mysterious of the whole lot, and who is, as of right now, the only emperor to have held the title, from the old days clean through to today. Let's talk about the red-haired one. Picture a straw hat. A cheap, battered, ordinary straw hat. The kind you'd buy at a market stall. and not think twice about. That hat is one of the most important objects in the entire series, and it belongs, at the start of everything, to Shanks. I want to start there with the hat, because it tells you almost everything about who Shanks is before we get into a single fact about his power. Here's a man near the top of the pirate world, feared across the seas, and the story we get of him first is a small, human one. He spends time in a sleepy little village, drinking in the local bar, being laughed at by a starry-eyed kid who wants to be a pirate. And when he eventually sails off, he leaves that kid his hat, his own treasured hat, the one he'd got from someone important to him, handed down again with a promise attached. Give it back to me when you've become a great pirate. That's the seed the whole series grows from, and it's Shanks who plants it. Now, the version of Shanks people tend to remember is the one who gave up an arm, because that same kid, before the hat business, gets himself into trouble in the water, and a sea monster comes for him, and Shanks doesn't hesitate. He pulls the boy out and loses an arm doing it. An Emperor-tier pirate, one of the strongest people alive, trading a limb to save one child in one small village. And when the kid is horrified, apologising, Shanks just laughs it off. It's only an arm, there's something in that gesture that defines him. The casual, enormous generosity of a man who has nothing left to prove, and knows it. Here's what makes him genuinely unusual among the emperors though, and it's the sort of fact that makes you re-examine the whole cast. Shanks has no devil fruit, none. Every other emperor we're talking about tonight leans on some strange world-bending power baked into their body. Whitebeard had his earthquakes. The others we'll get to. Shanks has a sword, an ordinary human body, and that's it. What he has instead is haki, which in this world is a kind of willpower made physical. Everyone has the potential for it, in theory, but a rare few can push it to frankly absurd levels, and Shanks is one of those few. In particular, he's a master of the rarest branch of it, the kind sometimes called Conqueror's Haki, which is essentially the raw force of your will pressing down on everyone weaker around you. Only a handful of people in the world have it. Fewer still can wield it the way he can, and the way he can is a bit terrifying in a quiet way. When Shanks turns that will up, ordinary pirates faint, sea monsters flee. On more than one occasion, the mere fact of his arrival somewhere has ended a conflict before it started, because everyone present understood, on an animal level, that they did not want him involved. No devil fruit, remember. Just a man, a sword, and a will heavy enough to bend a room. In a series absolutely stuffed with flashy magical powers, there's something I find deeply cool about the guy at the very top whose whole thing is that he's just fundamentally unshakable. You saw it most clearly at the end of that war we were just talking about. Marineford, after Whitebeard had already fallen, with the battlefield still churning, and more bloodshed clearly on the way. Shanks arrived late with his crew, and rather than throw himself into the fighting, he simply declared it over. Told everyone, in effect, that anyone who wanted to keep going would have to go through the Red Hair Pirates first. And they stopped. A war of that scale brought to a close not with a bigger explosion, but with the arrival of one man whose word carried enough weight to make the whole thing wind down. He even saw to it that Whitebeard and the Fallen were given a proper burial. Enemies, technically, and he still gave them their dignity. That's very Shanks. He's also, and I say this with affection, the most frustrating character in the series, if you're the type who wants answers. Because Shanks is a mystery box wearing a friendly face. He turns up, he does something enormously consequential, he says something loaded and vague, and then he vanishes again before you can work out what he's up to. His crew is full of people who are clearly heavy hitters in their own right, and we know almost nothing about most of them. His past is tangled up with the Pirate King's own crew, because before he was Shanks the Emperor, he was a young apprentice aboard Roger's ship, one of two youngsters running around that legendary cruise deck. His connections reach into the highest and strangest corners of the world, in ways the story is still slowly unveiling. Every time you think you've got a handle on him, another layer turns over. His bounty, when it was finally revealed, sat right up at the top of the active pirates, just above 4 billion. And what I find telling about that number is how little we've seen him do to earn it on screen. Whitebeard we watched fight a war. The others we watch rule and clash and fall. Shanks mostly floats at the edges, doing something significant in the background, and then drifting off. And yet the world rates him at the very top regardless. That gap between how little we see and how highly he's ranked is, I think, entirely deliberate. It's the story telling you that whatever Shanks is doing off-page is at least as important as anything happening in front of us. Because here's the quiet, remarkable thing about him, and it's why he anchors this whole tour. Of the 4 emperors from the old era, the era of Whitebeard and God Valley survivors, Shanks is the only one still holding the title today. Everyone else from that generation of emperors has fallen or died, or been dethroned and replaced. The seats have turned over around him. New occupants have come and gone. And through all of it, Shanks has just remained. The one fixed point, the single thread of continuity connecting the world's old rulers to its new ones. There's something almost gravitational about that. When we get to the newer emperors, the ones who rose up in the main story, you'll notice that Shanks keeps looming at the edge of their stories too. The way he loomed at the edge of Whitebeard's. He's the constant they're all in various ways oriented around. The man who gave the protagonist his hat and his dream. The man who ended the Great War with a sentence. The man who's watched every other emperor's chair change hands, while never once giving up his own. We still don't fully know what he's after. That's the honest state of things, even now. His deepest goals, the reason behind half of what he does, the full weight of his connections, are all still partly in shadow. But that's rather fitting for the one emperor who's outlasted every version of the title. Some people you understand by watching what they do. Shanks you mostly understand by watching how the world rearranges itself around the space where he's standing. That's the old guard, more or less. Whitebeard gone, Shanks enduring. But there were 2 more emperors from that older era. 2 more empires built by survivors of that shattered crew we talked about. And both of them ruled in ways completely unlike the family man or the wanderer. One built his power on the simple, brutal fact that he seemingly could not be killed. Let's go to the closed country and the dragon that ran it. There's a country in One Piece called Wano. It's isolated, closed off from the rest of the world by choice and by geography, surrounded by brutal seas and ringed by cliffs. A place with its own culture and its own rules that has spent centuries keeping outsiders out. It's beautiful in the way the story draws it, all mountains and rivers and old traditions. And for a long stretch of the modern era, it was owned top to bottom by a dragon. That dragon is Kaido, and before we even get to the man, I want to sit with his reputation for a second, because it's one of the great running ideas in the series. Kaido is known as the strongest creature in the world. Not strongest man, creature. The distinction matters. Where Whitebeard was the strongest man, a human ceiling, Kaido gets rated in a different category altogether. Something less than human and more than human at the same time. The world looks at him and doesn't quite reach for the word man. And the thing everyone knows about Kaido, the thing that made his name, is that he apparently cannot die. This is where I have to tell you about one of the darker running gags in the series. And I'll keep it light because the story mostly plays it for grim comedy, rather than anything heavier. Kaido has, by his own account, lived a life so relentlessly at the top that he's grown bored of it. And he's tried to end things more times than he can count. Thrown himself off impossible heights, been captured and put to death by the authorities. Been on the receiving end of attacks that would erase almost anyone. And none of it worked. He keeps surviving. Executions failed. Falls that should have flattened him just left him mildly annoyed. Over time, this became less a tragedy and more a legend. the pirate who went looking for a worthy death and simply couldn't find one because nothing in the world was strong enough to grant it. Grim, yes, but you can see how a reputation like that curdles into pure terror for everyone around him. How do you fight something that's spent its whole life failing to kill itself? His crew were called the Beast's Pirates, and the name is quite literal. Kaido built his organization around a specific, unsettling idea. He wanted an army of monsters, people with the powers of animals, and to get there, he leaned on a factory of artificial devil fruits. Now, natural devil fruits, like Whitebeard's earthquake fruit, are one thing, rare and strange and mostly reliable. But Kaido's operation mass-produced imitation ones, and these knockoffs, called smiles, were a nasty piece of business. They were meant to give a person some animal trait or ability, and sometimes they did, but most of them failed. And the failure had a cruel twist to it, which is that the people they failed on lost the ability to express negative emotion. They could only laugh. Whatever pain or grief or fear they felt underneath, all that came out was laughter. An army built partly on that. It tells you exactly what kind of ruler Kaido was: efficient, ruthless, and completely uninterested in what it cost the people underneath him. The man himself carried a natural devil fruit, and it's a beauty, honestly, one of the most impressive in the series. It's a mythical sort, the kind that's vanishingly rare, and it let him turn into an enormous serpentine dragon, an azure dragon out of Eastern legend, coiling through the sky. When Kaido went full dragon, he could fly, breathe devastating blasts, and generally reshape the weather around him. There's an image the story gives you of Kaido in dragon form, hauling an entire island up into the clouds. And it's the kind of casual world-warping display that puts his ranking beyond argument. His bounty was up in the fours, above 4.5 billion, one of the very highest ever recorded. And unlike Shanks, you got to see exactly why on screen. His philosophy, if you can call it that, was the bleak opposite of Whitebeard's. Where Whitebeard believed power was for protecting the people you love, Kaido believed love and loyalty and kindness were all just weaknesses dressed up in nicer words. To him, the only thing that was real was strength, and the only relationship that made sense was the one between the strong and the people who obeyed them out of fear. He'd have looked at Whitebeard's family of sons and seen a liability. In fact, from what we're told, he did think exactly that about his old crewmate, considered him soft-hearted despite all that power. Two survivors of the same broken crew, and they came away with completely opposite lessons about what the whole thing was for. He held Wano through terror and through control. He kept the country poisoned and industrialized, its rivers fouled, its people worked hard and kept desperate, all in service of building weapons and armies for a much bigger ambition. Because Kaido, in the end, wasn't content just ruling one closed country. He wanted the biggest war the world had ever seen. He wanted to burn the current order down and remake it, with himself at the centre, and Wano was going to be the forge for it. In that ambition, funnily enough, you can hear a faint echo of the old Rock's captain he'd once served under. The dream of tipping over the whole board never quite left him. There's a whole buried history to how he got his grip on Wano in the first place, and it's a genuinely sad one that's worth a gentle mention. Wano wasn't always his. It had been a proud, independent country for centuries, closed off by choice, ruled by a line of samurai lords called the Kozuki. And there was a time when it might have gone a very different way, because one of those lords, a wild and big-hearted man, remembered fondly across the whole arc, actually wanted to throw Wano's doors open and reconnect it with the outside world. He'd sailed the seas, seen what was out there, and come home dreaming of a country that didn't have to hide. Kaido, working hand in hand with a scheming local who wanted the throne for himself, put an end to that. The good lord was killed, the ruling family was scattered and nearly wiped out, and Wano was sealed up tight under new management. Its borders closed not to protect its people, but to keep them trapped and its industry hidden. So the closed country wasn't really a proud tradition by the end. It was a prison with the doors welded shut, and the dragon held the only key, which makes the moment it finally opens, generations of grief later, land all the harder. Some doors stay shut a long time before the right people come to force them. His seat of power was a place called Onigashima, a great skull-shaped island fortress, and that's where it all came apart. Because Wano is also where a new generation finally caught up with him. A younger crew and their allies pushed into Onigashima in a raid, and over a long and brutal battle, they picked apart his officers, one by one, and then went for Kaido himself. And after everything, after a life of surviving every death the world could throw at him, Kaido was finally beaten, knocked down through the island into the burning rock beneath it. His exact fate is left a little ambiguous in the way the series likes, but for all practical purposes, the strongest creature in the world was toppled, and his grip on Wano broke, and the country he'd choked for years finally got to breathe. I'll tell you the detail that I think makes Kaido more than just a big, scary dragon, because it's the sort of thing that sticks with you. For all his talk of strength being the only truth, the person who finally beat him did it while carrying exactly the things Kaido despised: loyalty, friends, a crew that would die for each other. The thing Kaido called weakness turned out to be the thing that ended him. And there's a quiet argument buried in that outcome, the story making its case about what power is actually for. Kaido spent his whole life looking for someone strong enough to give him a real fight, maybe even a real death. And when he finally found them, they were strong precisely because of everything he'd sworn was pointless. There's a bitter kind of poetry in it that I don't think Kaido himself would have appreciated, but I do. His fall matters for our bigger story too, because it did to the Emperor Roster what Whitebeard's death had done years earlier. It left a gap at the very top. The strongest creature was gone, and the world's papers went looking for who'd earned the right to stand in his place. The answer in Kaido's case was fairly obvious because it was the person who'd just knocked him into a volcano. But we'll get there. First though, there's one more empire from the old era to visit, and it might be the strangest of all of them. Where Whitebeard built a family and Kaido built an army, this next one built something closer to a whole nation held together by blood ties and by a power that could give life to the furniture. Let's go and meet the woman who ran it. Imagine a country where the sun overhead has a face and a temper, where the clouds can talk, where the trees might warn you off, and the rivers might have opinions. That's Totoland, and it's one of the more delightfully bizarre corners of the whole series. It was ruled by a woman named Charlotte Linlin, though almost nobody calls her that. To the world she was Big Mum, and to understand her, you have to understand the two things she loved most, which were her enormous family, and distantly in second place, sweets. Let's start with the country because it's the best way into her. Totoland was a cluster of islands, each themed around some kind of confection or treat, all of it stitched together into a single sprawling territory, with Big Mum sitting at the centre like a queen. And the population wasn't only people, it was full of what the series calls homies, which is where her power comes in. Big Mum carried a devil fruit called the Soru Soru no Mi, the soul fruit, and it let her do something unsettling. She could take a portion of a person's soul, their very lifespan, and pour it into objects. Give them life. So the sun that shines over Totoland, a burning thing she named and befriended, is alive. So is the storm cloud that follows her, crackling and eager. So are countless little household objects, and forces of nature across her kingdom, all of them animated by fragments of soul she'd collected, willingly or otherwise, over the years. It's whimsical on the surface and quite dark underneath, which is very much Big Mum's whole deal. She could take years off your life with a touch if you were afraid of her, and fear made it easier. She'd essentially tax her subjects in lifespan. a country of living candy and talking weather, run by a woman who could reach into your chest and skim a decade off the top, charming and horrifying in exactly equal measure. Now, the family. Big Mum's answer to the question of what power is for was simply family, but she took it to a scale that beggars belief. She married and married and married strategically across the years, and she had an absolutely staggering number of children, dozens upon dozens of them, an entire dynasty of sons and daughters. And she used them like pieces on a board, marrying them off to useful allies, placing them in charge of islands, building a vast web of blood and marriage that spread her influence across the new world. On paper, it looks like the warmest possible thing, a giant loving family gathered around one enormous mother. In practice, it was closer to a corporation or a mob, with Big Mum as the matriarch who demanded absolute loyalty and did not take betrayal well. And here's the thing that made her genuinely frightening beyond the raw strength, which was considerable. Her bounty sat right up with the highest ever recorded, in the same billions high bracket as the other titans, reflecting a woman who'd been a major force in the world since before the emperors were even formally a thing. But the strength wasn't the scary part was her instability. Big Mum suffered from these terrible cravings, and if she wanted a particular food and didn't get it, she'd fall into a rampage, an eating disorder weaponized into a natural disaster, tearing through her own territory and her own people without recognizing anyone in her path. A living earthquake of appetite. Her own family lived partly in fear of setting her off. Imagine loving someone and being terrified of them at once, at that scale, and you've got the emotional weather of Toto Land. There's a backstory to her that the series eventually fills in, and it's genuinely tragic, so I'll touch it gently. She wasn't born a monster. She was a child once, a massive child, with a strength she couldn't control, and a hunger she couldn't manage. And she was taken in by a caretaker figure, a woman named Mother Carmel who ran a home for children. Big Mom idolized her. And then, in a scene the series handles with real care, Carmel and the other children simply vanished one day, under circumstances that point, quietly and horribly, at Big Mom's own uncontrolled power during one of her hunger fits. She never understood what happened. She spent the rest of her life carrying the image of Mother Carmel as a kind of guardian angel, never grasping that she'd likely been the cause of her disappearance. It reframes the whole rampaging matriarch, doesn't it? Underneath the terror is a child who lost the one person who was ever kind to her and never even knew she'd done it. I find her genuinely one of the more complex figures in the series for that reason. It would be easy to write her off as a greedy tyrant, and she is one, no argument. But there's this deep, unhealed wound at the centre of her that explains the desperate grasping at family, the need to gather people to herself and never let them go. She's trying to rebuild the home she lost, over and over, on an impossible scale, and it keeps not working because you can't buy back that kind of loss with sheer size. Her empire crossed paths with the main story in a big way. First around a wedding, a whole elaborate alliance by marriage that went sideways in spectacular fashion, and then later at Wano. Because Big Mum, like her old crewmate Kaido, wasn't content ruling her own patch. The two of them, both survivors of that Shattered Rocks crew we talked about, actually joined forces for a while, an alliance of two emperors that was exactly the nightmare the world government spends its life trying to prevent. Two of them working together, aiming to reshape the world. It's the sort of team-up that in principle should have been unstoppable. In practice, it's where they both fell. During that same raid on Onigashima, where Kaido was toppled, Big Mum was fought and beaten too, though not by the same hands. Two younger pirates, rising stars of the new generation, teamed up against her, and after an exhausting battle, sent her down into the depths of the fortress alongside the collapse. Like Kaido, her precise fate is left a touch ambiguous, but the outcome was clear enough. The only woman ever to sit among the 4 emperors, the matriarch of the Living Candy Kingdom, was knocked off her throne on the same day as her ally. 2 emperor seats emptied in a single event. The old era didn't just crack that day, it came apart in a big way. What I keep coming back to with Big Mum is the contrast she draws with Whitebeard, since they came from the same origin and both landed on family as their answer. Whitebeard's family was chosen, gathered from the unwanted, held together by genuine affection with nothing demanded in return. Big Mom's was blood and marriage, an obligation, held together by fear as much as love, a family she owned rather than one she'd earned. Same word, opposite meanings, and I think the story quietly prefers Whitebeard's version, given how each of them ends. But there's something human and sad in Big Mum's that I can't dismiss. She wanted the thing he had. She just went about getting it in the only way a hurt, hungry, impossibly powerful child ever learned how. So that's the old guard, all 4 of them now. Whitebeard, gone in a war for his son. Shanks, still standing, still a mystery. Kaido, the undying dragon, finally given his defeat, and Big Mum, the matriarch, toppled beside him. 2 seats empty, 2 seats held, which means it's time to turn to the people who filled those empty chairs. The new era. And the first of them is the one who quietly haunted Whitebeard's whole story. The man who waited years for a fallen giant's power and then simply took it. There's a rule in the world of One Piece that's stated early and treated as absolute. 1 person, 1 devil fruit. Try to eat a second, and your body can't hold 2 of those cursed powers at once. You die. It's one of the firmest laws the series has. And then there's Marshall D. Teach, better known as Blackbeard, who wields 2 of them at the same time and is walking around perfectly fine, the exception to the 1 iron rule. That impossibility is the whole shape of him. So let's build up to how he pulled it off, because it's a proper slow burn story. Blackbeard spent years as a nobody, and I mean that as the highest compliment to his patience. He served on Whitebeard's crew, that great family we talked about, as an ordinary member of one of the divisions for a very long time. Decades by some counts. Not a captain, not a standout, just there, biding his time. And the thing he was waiting for, the thing he'd apparently been waiting his entire life for, was a very specific devil fruit. He had a plan, and the plan required patience most people simply don't have. He stayed on that crew, loyal on the surface, watching, until the fruit he wanted finally surfaced within reach. The fruit was the Yami Yami no Mi, the dark fruit. And it's a strange and frightening one. It gave Blackbeard control over darkness itself, treated almost like a force of gravity, an endless, hungry void he could pull things into. But its nastiest trait is what it does to other devil fruit users. The darkness could nullify their powers on contact, grab hold of another special-powered person, and, for as long as you're touching them, they're just an ordinary human again, all their abilities switched off. In a world where nearly every major player leans on some fruit power, having a fruit that cancels fruit powers is a horrifying trump card. It's the reason Blackbeard could do the second impossible thing later. But to get it, he did something dark, and this is where the patient nobody shows his real face. A crewmate of his, a good man by all accounts, found that fruit first, and Blackbeard killed him for it. Murdered a member of his own family, the family that had taken him in, to take the power he'd been waiting for. That murder is the moment Blackbeard's true trajectory begins, and it's also the crack that ran right through Whitebeard's crew, because the man who committed it then fled, and the fallout from that killing is part of what eventually dragged everyone toward that great war. Now here's the part that turns Blackbeard from a dangerous individual into a world-altering one. At the end of Marineford, in the chaos after Whitebeard fell, Blackbeard did something no one had ever managed. He took Whitebeard's power for himself. The earthquake fruit, the quake, the world-ending power we talked about. Somehow, through a method the series has kept deliberately mysterious, Blackbeard was able to claim that fruit from Whitebeard's body and eat it and survive. Two devil fruits, the darkness that cancels powers and the earthquakes that could crack the world. Held by one man, who by every rule of this universe should be a corpse for even trying. Nobody fully knows how. There are theories, some to do with the peculiar nature of the darkness fruit, some to do with Blackbeard's body being unusual in ways that haven't been explained yet. The series is clearly holding that card close for a reason, and I suspect we won't get the full answer until quite late. But the effect is undeniable. In that one night, Blackbeard went from a dangerous rogue to a man carrying two of the most feared powers in existence, and he walked off the battlefield of the greatest war of the age as a completely new kind of threat. He'd essentially claimed the fallen emperor's power for himself and set himself up as the eventual replacement, all in one move. It's one of the coldest, most audacious plays in the whole series. His crew, the Blackbeard pirates, grew fast after that, and they grew ugly. Where Whitebeard gathered the unwanted and loved them, Blackbeard gathered the dangerous and used them. He broke into the world's most secure prison and recruited a pack of monstrous criminals straight off death row, building a crew designed for sheer destructive capability. His bounty climbed into the same rarefied billions as the others, just below Shanks, reflecting a world that had very quickly clocked how serious this man had become. And he settled his operation on an island called Hachinosu, sometimes called the Beehive, a lawless pirate haven. And here's a detail I find clever about how Blackbeard operates. He's not just brute force, he plays the world's own systems. At one point he tried to get his island recognised, formally, as a member of the world government, turning his pirate den into something with official standing. A pirate who becomes, on paper, part of the very establishment he's supposedly outside of. It's the sort of move that tells you Blackbeard understands the board he's playing on far better than his thuggish appearance suggests. He's patient, he's calculating, and he thinks in decades. His current project, the one he's been pursuing in the recent stretch of the story, is even more alarming when you sit with it. He's collecting devil fruits, actively hunting down powerful ones, going after specific people to take theirs. A man who already broke the one-person, one-fruit rule now seems to be probing just how far that can go. Where does it stop? How many powers can one man hoard? The story hasn't answered that yet, but the very fact that Blackbeard is asking the question, and has the means to chase it, is the kind of thing that should make everyone else in the world nervous. There's a thread in his name I should mention because the series makes a quiet point of it. His full name is Marshall D. Teach. That middle initial, the D, is one of the great slow mysteries of One Piece. A handful of significant characters carry it, scattered across the story, and the series treats it as meaningful, in a way it's still unspooling. The Pirate King had it, our protagonist has it, and so does Blackbeard. Whatever that D signifies, and it's clearly building towards something, Blackbeard is part of that hidden lineage, which suggests his role in the endgame of the whole story is going to be larger than even his two fruits imply. Because that's the real weight of Blackbeard. His stated ambition is the same as the protagonist's. He wants to be the Pirate King. He wants to reach the end of the sea, find the great treasure, and claim the title Roger left empty, which puts him on a direct collision course with the hero. Two men chasing the exact same crown from opposite moral directions. If Whitebeard was the warmest emperor and Kaido the most brutal, Blackbeard might be the most purely dangerous, precisely because he's the most patient and the most ambitious. He waited decades for one fruit. He'll wait as long as it takes for the crown. He replaced Whitebeard in the most literal way anyone has ever replaced anyone, by taking the man's power off his fallen body and stepping into his seat. That's the first of the new emperors. The other new arrivals got there very differently. One of them earned his chair by knocking a dragon into a volcano, which we already spoiled a little, so let's finally give him his due. The rubber-limbed rookie who became a monster. Here's something that made me laugh the first time it properly clicked. There is a young man in this story who spent years being treated as a promising rookie, a small fish with big dreams, someone the serious pirates barely noticed. And then one day, the world's newspapers announced that he'd become one of the 4 emperors, ranked alongside the monsters and legends we've spent all this time talking about. And his own crew reacted with something close to disbelief. That's Monkey D. Luffy, the rubber-limbed goofball who became an emperor mostly by refusing to lose. If you know anything about One Piece, you know Luffy, because he's the hero of the whole thing. The straw hat-wearing optimist whose entire personality is that he wants to be free, and he wants to be the pirate king, and he's willing to punch anything that stands between him and either. He got his hat, you'll remember, from Shanks all those years ago, with that promise attached. So there's a lovely symmetry in the fact that the boy who was handed an emperor's hat grew up to become an emperor himself, and the two of them now sit at the same table, the mentor and the kid, both wearing the same title. The hat came full circle. For most of the series, Luffy's power was treated as fairly simple. He'd eaten a devil fruit as a child that turned his body to rubber, letting him stretch and bounce and take hits that would flatten anyone else. The gum fruit, everyone called it. Useful, flexible, a bit silly, and for years that seemed to be the whole story. He got stronger through training and sheer stubbornness, learned the willpower techniques we talked about with Shanks, climbed his way up through fight after fight, an underdog who kept punching above his weight. And then came the reveal, and it's one of the great long game twists in the series, so I'll lay it out gently because it reframes everything. That rubber fruit was never really a rubber fruit. Its true name is the Hito no Mi model Nika. It's one of those vanishingly rare mythical fruits, like Kaido's dragon, and it's tied to a figure out of legend, a sort of sun god called Nika, a warrior of liberation from old stories, a bringer of joy who freed people from suffering. The fruit had been mislabeled and hidden by the world government for centuries, called by that dull gum name specifically to bury what it actually was, because the government was afraid of it, afraid of what it represented. When Luffy pushed the fruit to its limit in his battle against Kaido, it awakened into its true form, something the series calls Gear 5, and it's gloriously absurd. His body becomes cartoonish, able to bend the rules of reality itself in this loose, laughing, anything-goes way, fighting with pure freedom and joy. It's the opposite of Kaido's cold brutality in every possible sense, which is exactly why it was the thing that finally beat him. That victory, knocking down the strongest creature in the world, is what earned Luffy his seat. The world looked at a rookie who toppled a dragon that had ruled unchallenged for decades and had no choice but to reclassify him. Emperor. His bounty leapt up to a colossal 3 billion, cementing it. And here's the political wrinkle I find fascinating, and it circles right back to what we said at the very start about bounties being threat assessments rather than power rankings. The government almost certainly downplayed him. He beat Kaido essentially by himself, and yet they framed the whole 1-0 victory as a shared effort split between him and his allies, handing out matching numbers as if it were a group project. A lot of readers think that was deliberate, that the government wanted to muddy exactly how dangerous Luffy had become, because the truth that one rookie had awakened a legendary liberation fruit and used it to slay an emperor was a truth they very much did not want spreading. Fear management. The number tells you less about Luffy than it tells you about how badly the world wants to keep a lid on him. His lineage adds to all this in a way that ties our whole night together rather neatly. Luffy is the son of a man named Dragon, who happens to be the most wanted man in the world. the leader of a revolutionary movement, openly trying to bring down the world government. So the hero's father is the government's single greatest political enemy, and his grandfather, on the other side, is Garp. Yes, that Garp, the marine hero from God Valley we talked about. The man who fought alongside the Pirate King to bring down the Rocks crew. So Luffy's grandfather helped shape the previous age of the world, and Luffy is now helping shape the next one, on the opposite side of the law from the family he came out of. 3 generations, 3 different relationships to the world's power, all in one bloodline. The wheel we keep mentioning, turning right there inside, a single family. What I love most about Luffy as an emperor, though, is how little he cares about being one. The others we've met built empires on purpose. They wanted the power or the family or the throne or the fight. Luffy stumbled into the title as a side effect of chasing something much simpler. He just wants to be free, and to be the Pirate King, and to help the people in front of him when they're in trouble. The Emperor status is almost an accident, a thing the world decided about him, rather than a thing he pursued. His crew is tiny compared to the vast fleets of the old emperors. He doesn't rule territories or tax people's lifespans or run a dynasty. He's an emperor with a handful of close friends and a going-nowhere sense of direction. And somehow that's enough, because the strength and the reputation are real, even if the empire isn't. There's a deeper layer to the Nika business that the series has been slowly unveiling, tied to an ancient figure, sometimes called Joy Boy, a name out of the deepest history of the world, connected to a promise made centuries ago and never kept. The story seems to be suggesting that Luffy, through this fruit and who he is the fulfillment of something very old, a liberation the world has been waiting on since the lost century of its history. It's heavy, mythic stuff, and it's still unfolding, so I won't overclaim, but it recasts the goofy rubber kid as something closer to a prophesied figure, which is a wild place for a character to end up when he started out just wanting meat and adventure. So that's the third of the new emperors. Blackbeard, who took his seat by force and calculation. Luffy, who backed into his by beating a dragon while chasing something else entirely. Which leaves one chair, the last of the new arrivals, and honestly, the funniest of the whole bunch, because if Luffy became an emperor slightly by accident, this next one became an emperor almost entirely by accident, propped up by other people's fear and his own remarkable talent for failing his way upward. Let's end the roster with the clown. Of all the twists in the modern era of One Piece, my absolute favourite is that one of the 4 emperors is a man who spends most of his screen time terrified, sweating, and desperately trying not to be found out. Buggy the Clown became one of the most feared pirates in the world, essentially by accident, and every time the story leans into the joke, I love it more. Let me set him up properly, because there's a real history here under the comedy. Buggy goes back a very long way. He was, believe it or not, an apprentice on the Pirate King's ship, running around that legendary deck as a youngster at the very same time as a certain red-haired boy we've already met. Buggy and Shanks were shipmates, back at the beginning, 2 kids on Roger's crew, and the 2 of them could not have diverged more completely. One became the mysterious, universally respected emperor whose word can end a war. The other became a small-time circus-themed pirate who, for most of the series, was a recurring joke, a blustering coward chased off by rookies. Same starting point, opposite destinations. If you ever want a lesson in how differently 2 lives can turn out from the same doorway, there it is. His power is fittingly ridiculous and quite clever. Buggy ate the Bara Bara no Mi, the chop chop fruit, which lets his body split into pieces and float around independently. Cut him with a sword and nothing happens. His parts just separate and reassemble. It made him immune to slashing attacks, which is useful. Though Buggy being Buggy, he mostly used it to run away in sections. A great power slightly wasted on a man whose primary instinct is self-preservation. Now, how does a known coward end up an emperor? This is where you have to understand the great engine of Buggy's entire life, which is that the world consistently, hilariously misreads him. Buggy stumbles into situations by pure bad luck, panics, does something cowardly or foolish, and it keeps landing in a way that makes him look like a criminal mastermind of terrifying ambition. He escaped the world's greatest prison and was at the Great War at Marineford, not through courage but through sheer flailing circumstance, and the world watched a man rub shoulders with legends and concluded he must be a legend himself. He gathered a following of pirates who idolized him, largely because they mistook his blundering for brilliance and his cowardice for some kind of laid-back confidence. Every failure got reinterpreted by an audience desperate to believe as a masterstroke. He fails upward, relentlessly. It's the funniest character arc in the series, and I mean that as praise. The thing that finally pushed him over the top into emperor status was a big structural change in the world, and it's worth pausing on because it ties back to how we started tonight. Remember the three great powers holding the world in balance: the Marines, the emperors, and the warlords, those government-sanctioned pirates. Well, that middle group, the warlords, got abolished. The world government decided the whole arrangement was more trouble than it was worth, and scrapped it, cutting those pirates loose and sending the Marines after them. That dissolution shook the board. And out of the reshuffle that followed, an organisation rose up that put Buggy right at its head. It's called the Cross Guild, and here's the delicious part. Buggy is its public face, its figurehead, the name and grinning image everyone associates with it, but he is absolutely not the one running it. The actual brains behind the Cross Guild are two genuinely terrifying figures who ended up under his banner through another one of Buggy's cosmic accidents. One is a former warlord, a cunning old crime lord named Crocodile, with grand ambitions of his own. The other is the greatest swordsman in the entire world, a cold, elegant, monstrously powerful man called Mihawk, the very swordsman our hero's crewmate has sworn to one day surpass. These two, either of whom could squash Buggy without effort, somehow ended up positioned beneath him on the org chart, and much of the comedy is Buggy privately terrified of the powerhouses he's supposedly commanding, praying nobody realises he's not actually in charge of anything. And the Cross Guild does something novel that I think is brilliant. It inverts the whole bounty system. Normally the government puts prices on pirates' heads. The Cross Guild started putting prices on the Marines' heads instead, turning the hunters into the hunted, offering pirates money to take down the very officers who'd been chasing them. It's a real threat to the world's order, an actual clever idea, and of course the world credits Buggy with dreaming it up, when in reality he's just a terrified clown whose name got stuck on the poster. His bounty climbed into the billions on the strength of it, above 3 billion, a number that puts a man who runs from fights in the same bracket as dragons and legends. The absurdity is the point. What I find quietly lovely about Buggy, underneath all the comedy, is what he represents in a story that's otherwise full of monsters and prophecies and world-ending powers. He's proof that the Emperor title really is just a matter of reputation and consensus, the thing we said right at the start. 3 of the 4 current emperors earned their seats through genuine, terrifying capability. And then there's Buggy, holding a seat through pure reputation, a living demonstration that the title is a story the world tells about you as much as it's a measure of what you can do. If enough people believe you're one of the 4 most dangerous men alive, then in a real sense you are, whatever the truth of it. Buggy is the loophole in the whole system, walking around in clown makeup, and the fact that the system has a loophole that Big tells you something true about how power actually works. Half of it is real. The other half is just everyone agreeing to be afraid. There's also something genuinely sweet in his old connection to Shanks, and the series pokes at it now and then. 2 boys from the same crew, one who became a mystery and a legend, one who became a joke and then, improbably, a legend of a completely different kind. If they ever properly reunite as equals, both of them emperors now, I suspect it'll be played half for laughs and half for something that catches in your throat. Because whatever else Buggy is, he got there. By the most ridiculous road imaginable, tripping over his own feet the entire way, he ended up at the very top sitting in one of those 4 chairs beside the friend he started out with. There's a strange kind of triumph in that, even if Buggy himself is mostly just relieved nobody's found him out yet. So there's the full set. The old guard and the new. Whitebeard and Shanks and Kaido and Big Mum from the era that's passing, and Blackbeard and Luffy and Buggy stepping into the seats that opened up, with Shanks bridging the two as the one who never left. 4 chairs, 7 people across 2 eras, and the whole strange machinery of how a title with no throne gets worn, and lost, and worn again. Before we let the night wind down, let's step back from the individuals and look at the board as a whole, because there are a few loose threads worth sitting with, and a couple of mysteries still hanging over all of them. Let's pull back from the individual chairs for a bit and look at the table they're sitting at, because the arrangement of power in One Piece has been quietly rearranging itself this whole time, and it's worth appreciating as its own thing. We talked early on about the balance that held the world roughly steady, the 3-way standoff between the government's military, the emperors, and that middle tier of leashed pirates. For a long stretch, that structure just sat there, load-bearing, and everyone treated it as more or less permanent. The interesting thing about the modern era of the story is watching that permanence turn out to be an illusion. One of those 3 legs got kicked out entirely. The government dissolved its tier of sanctioned pirates, cut them loose, and sent its forces to hunt them down. And once you remove a whole leg from a 3-legged stool, everything that was resting on it has to go somewhere. Where a lot of it went was straight to the emperors, and to the chaos of their seats changing hands. Because here's a thing the series is very good at showing, quietly in the background. When an emperor falls, it isn't a clean event. It's not like a title belt passing tidily to the next holder. It's more like a dam breaking. An emperor's territory is only safe because it's theirs. The moment they're gone, every island they were protecting becomes contested ground overnight. Every smaller crew that paid them tribute has to scramble for a new patron or a new plan. Every rival who'd been kept in check by the balance suddenly sees an opening. The fall of a single emperor sends ripples across huge stretches of the map, and the people who feel it worst are usually the ordinary ones. The island populations who are sheltering, however uncomfortably, under a powerful flag, and now find themselves exposed. You saw it most clearly with the collapse of the old guard. When 2 of the old emperors went down on the same day, in that raid we keep circling back to, it didn't just free the country they'd been strangling. It sent a shockwave through the entire world's order. Territories destabilised. Crews that had been part of those empires suddenly found their status uncertain, their protection gone, targets appearing on backs that had been untouchable a week earlier. A whole ecosystem that had grown up around a couple of powerful figures had to reorganise itself in real time. The series treats these power shifts almost like weather systems, vast forces moving across the map, and the individual dramas we follow are little boats caught up in them. And into all this churn came a new generation, which is the part I find exciting. For most of the modern story, the emperors were the establishment, the old ceiling that rookies bounced off, but a particular crop of young pirates rose up all at once. A batch of rookies talented and reckless enough that the world started keeping a wary eye on them. Some people call them the worst of a generation, that kind of framing. A cluster of dangerous newcomers who all appeared around the same time. And these are the ones who started toppling emperors. Our rubber-limbed hero was one of them. So were the 2 who took down the matriarch, a pair of rising captains who've been circling the same waters as Luffy. Sometimes as allies, sometimes as rivals, all of them chasing the top. Watching that generation climb is watching the wheel turn in real time. The rookies of today becoming the monsters of tomorrow. Exactly the cycle we talked about with God Valley, all those centuries of story ago. The government, for its part, hasn't just sat still through all this. Losing a whole tier of its balance forced it to adapt, and there are hints throughout the recent story of it reaching for new tools. Secret units operating in the shadows, quiet operations aimed at the emperors and the rising rookies both. A sense that the establishment knows the old arrangement is gone and is improvising a new one, trying to hold on to control in a world where the neat three-way standoff has become something messier and more dangerous. There's a distinct feeling in the modern chapters of an era ending, of a long-standing order coming apart at the seams, and everyone, government and pirate alike, scrambling to work out what replaces it. That's really the through line of the whole Emperor story, when you zoom out far enough. It's not a fixed hierarchy, it's a system in slow, constant motion, always one big battle away from rearranging itself. The 4 chairs stay, but the occupants change, and every change is an earthquake. And the direction of that motion, across the sweep of the story, is toward a reckoning. The world is building towards something, some final settling of the balance that's been wobbling for decades, and the emperors are right at the centre of it. When the story eventually reaches its endgame, and it's clearly heading somewhere enormous, these 4 seats are going to be where a lot of the weight lands. There's a generational melancholy to it that I find quite moving, especially late at night. The old giants are falling one by one, the figures who defined the world for 30 years, who came out of that shattered crew and built empires and held the seas in their grip, are being cleared off the board to make room for whatever comes next. Some of them died, some got dethroned, and the ones stepping into their places are younger, stranger, carrying different dreams and different powers, reshaping the very idea of what an emperor is as they go. An emperor used to mean a vast fleet and a conquered territory. Now it can mean a rubber kid with a handful of friends, or a clown propped up by people he's scared of. The title's the same. What it means is quietly changing. And the thing that holds it all together, the one fixed star while everything else spins, is the man we said would keep looming at the edges. Shanks, still there, still watching, having outlasted every version of the old order and seen the new one take shape around him. Whatever the end game is, whatever the world is building toward, he's positioned right in the middle of it. The last thread connecting the age of the old monsters to whatever the new one becomes. The board is shifting. He's the one piece that hasn't moved. That feels significant, and I suspect the story knows exactly how significant it is. So that's the shape of the whole thing, seen from above. Not a ladder, not a fixed ranking, but a living, shifting arrangement of power that keeps tipping over and reassembling, with 4 chairs at the top that different monsters keep occupying, and a world holding its breath to see where it all finally settles. Before we drift off, though, there are a few genuine mysteries still hanging over these people. Threads the story hasn't pulled yet, and they're the kind of thing that's rather nice to turn over, slowly as you fall asleep. One of the great pleasures of a story this long, and this carefully built, is the pile of unanswered questions it leaves lying around, and the emperors sit right on top of some of the biggest ones. So let's wander through a few of them, gently, the way you'd poke at a puzzle you have no intention of actually solving tonight. Start with a single letter, the letter D. We touched on it with Blackbeard, that odd initial tucked into his full name, Marshall D. Teach. It's not just his. Scattered across the story, a handful of significant people carry that same middle initial, and the story treats it as deeply meaningful without ever quite spelling out why. The Pirate King had it. Our hero has it. His grandfather, the marine legend, has it. Blackbeard has it. There are others, and the pattern is strange because these people don't share a family or a nation or a side. They're pirates and marines, heroes and villains, spread all over the map. What ties them together is something older and stranger than any of that. The story calls it, in hushed tones, the Will of D, and hints that it represents some ancient current running through history, a kind of inherited defiance, a thread of people who keep rising up against the world's established order across the generations. The government seems to fear the D specifically, but the full truth of what it means is one of the deepest secrets the series is still holding. And it's rather wonderful that two of the emperors, the rubber-limbed hero and the two-fruited schemer, both carry it on opposite moral paths, both hurtling toward the same crown. Whatever the D is building toward, they're both part of it. Then there's the biggest hole in the world's memory, the thing everything else seems to orbit. There's a stretch of history, about a century long, that the world government has scrubbed almost entirely from the record. A lost century. Something happened back then. Some great conflict, some fallen kingdom, some truth so dangerous that the powers who won have spent hundreds of years since making sure nobody can piece it back together. They've outlawed the study of it. They've destroyed the means of reading the old records. And the whole current shape of the world, including the government's own authority, rests on top of that buried century, like a house built over a sealed basement. The emperors matter to this because the end game of the story seems to involve dragging that basement into the light. The great treasure everyone's chasing, the one at the end of the sea, is tangled up with the truth of that lost age. And the person who reaches it, likely one of the D-carrying emperors, is going to inherit that truth along with the crown. Which loops us to the mythic thread under our hero, that legendary liberation figure his fruit is named for, the sun god of the old stories, connects to a name out of the deepest past, a figure from the lost century who made a promise the world has apparently been waiting centuries to see kept. The story keeps quietly suggesting that our rubber-limbed emperor is somehow the one who finally keeps it, that his goofy, joyful, freedom-loving nature isn't a coincidence, but a fulfillment. That the thing the world buried all those years ago is finally coming back around in the shape of a laughing kid in a straw hat. It's an enormous idea, and the series is unspooling it very slowly, so I won't claim more than that. But it turns one of the newest, least imperial of the emperors into possibly the most important figure in the entire history of the world, which is a lovely, absurd place for him to have ended up. There's Shanks, of course, because there's always Shanks. We said he was the great mystery box, and the mysteries around him have only deepened the longer the story goes. The government treats him with a strange deference. He's a pirate, an emperor, an outlaw by every definition, and yet the highest powers in the world seem willing to grant him audiences and hear him out in a way they'd never extend to the others. That's not normal. It hints at some connection, some standing, some history that puts Shanks in a category of his own, and the story's been very deliberate about not explaining it. What does he actually want? What's he been quietly doing at the edges of every major event for the whole series? Why does the establishment listen when he speaks? All still open. He's an emperor whose deepest goals remain almost completely unknown. And given how the story keeps positioning him at the centre of things without ever showing his hand, I suspect the answers, when they come, are going to be large. Blackbeard's central impossibility is still unexplained too. How does one man carry two of those cursed powers when the rule is absolute that a second one kills you? The series has dropped hints, something unusual about the darkness fruit, something unusual about the man's own body, whispers that he might not be built quite like other people, but the actual mechanism is still a locked door, and it matters because, if there's a trick to it, Blackbeard's current habit of hoarding more and more powers suggests he's planning to push that trick as far as it'll go. A man who found a loophole in the most fundamental rule of the world's power system, and is now busy exploiting it. Nobody knows the ceiling on that, least of all, I suspect, the people who'll eventually have to stop him. And there are the ambiguous fates hanging over the fallen old guard. The dragon knocked into the volcano, and the matriarch sent down into the magma beneath Onigashima, both toppled on the same day, both with their ultimate status left just slightly open in the way the series loves. Are they truly gone? Could either resurface? The story has been coy, and coyness in this series usually means a door left deliberately ajar. It would be very like One Piece to bring one of them roaring back at exactly the wrong moment, or to reveal that a fall which looked final was nothing of the sort. Until the story says otherwise, those two sit in a kind of limbo, off the board, but not confirmed gone, and that uncertainty is its own quiet source of tension, humming under the current era. What I love about all these loose threads is how they knit the emperors into the deepest machinery of the story. These aren't just strong pirates who happen to sit at the top. They're tangled into the oldest secrets the world has, the buried century, the mysterious lineage, the ancient promise, the powers that break the rules. The road to the end of this story runs directly through those four chairs. Whoever's sitting in them when the world finally cracks open its oldest secrets is going to be standing at the very centre of the whole thing. But that's all still ahead, still unwritten, still waiting out there past the edge of what we know. The pleasure of it for now is exactly that it's unresolved. A set of beautiful open questions to turn over slowly in the dark. And on that note, let's let the whole thing settle and bring the night gently to a close. I mentioned something back when we were talking about Shanks that I want to come back to now and give a bit more room, because it's the thing that quietly explains why the emperors are the emperors. It's called haki, and once you understand it, a lot of the top tier of this world snaps into focus. Here's the short version we had before. In One Piece, devil fruits get all the flashy attention, the earthquakes and the dragons and the darkness. But underneath the fruits, there's a second, deeper power system that everyone has access to in principle. And it comes not from any cursed fruit, but from your own willpower, made physical. That's haki. And at the very highest levels of the world, the fruits start to matter less than the haki, because everyone at the top has a monstrous fruit, or a monstrous skill, and what actually separates them is the strength of the will behind it. Shanks, remember, has no fruit at all and sits right at the summit. That's not a fluke. That's the whole point being made in the shape of one character. Haki comes in a few different flavours, and they're worth knowing because they show up constantly once you can spot them. The first is a kind of sixth sense, an awareness that lets you feel the presence of people and creatures around you, even when you can't see them. Sense their emotions, read their intentions. Skilled users can feel an ambush coming, track someone through a wall, tell how many opponents are hidden nearby. Pushed to its highest levels, it edges into something close to precognition. The very best users able to sense a moment or two into the future, seeing an attack before it's thrown. It's the quiet one, the subtle one, and it's the difference between a fighter who reacts and a fighter who already knew. The second flavour is more of a brawler's tool. It lets you wrap your body, or your weapon, in an invisible armour of pure force. It hardens you against blows, and just as importantly, it lets you strike things that would otherwise be untouchable, including those slippery fruit users whose bodies turn to smoke or flame or shadow. Without this kind of haki, some opponents are simply impossible to hit. With it, you can land a real blow on anything. At the higher levels, it turns offensive, letting you channel that force straight past someone's guard and damage them from the inside, and letting you coat your attacks in a way that turns an ordinary punch into something that can crack a giant. This is the workhorse of the top tier, the thing that makes their raw physical hits so absurdly destructive. And then there's the rare one, the special one. This is the branch we touched on with Shanks, sometimes called the colour of the conquering king, and only a tiny handful of people in the entire world are born able to use it. It can't be taught into someone who doesn't have the spark. You either have that quality or you don't. What it does at its base is impose your will directly onto everyone weaker-willed around you. Turn it on, and the crowd of lesser fighters simply drops, knocked out cold by the sheer pressure of your presence without you lifting a finger. It's the mark of a natural-born ruler, and it's no accident that so many of the emperors have it. In a sense, it's part of the job description. To gather thousands of dangerous people under one flag, it helps enormously to radiate a will that makes their knees buckle on instinct. The truly frightening masters, though, take that conqueror's will and learn to focus it, to coat their strikes in it, so that instead of just making weaklings faint, it wraps around a punch or a blade and adds a whole extra layer of devastation on contact. When two people who can both do that clash, the series draws it as the very air splitting, black lightning crackling off the point where their wills meet. There's an old image the story gives you of two of the greatest titans of the previous age meeting in battle, and the sky itself seeming to divide from the force of it. That's two conquerors' wills colliding. It's less a fight than a collision of two people's entire sense of self, rendered as a natural disaster. The dragon we talked about, the strongest creature, had a line about all this that stuck with me, roughly the idea that in the end it's Haki that decides the fate of the world. Coming from him, someone who could already turn into a weather-warping dragon. That's telling. Even the monster with the legendary fruit believed the deeper contest was the contest of wills. And you can watch that belief get tested and proven across the story. The rubber-limbed hero didn't beat that dragon by having a bigger fruit. He beat him by finally matching him in Haki, by learning to coat his own strikes in that conqueror's will, by the sheer refusal of his spirit to stay down. The fruit awakened into something glorious, yes, but the fight was won on will. That's the story making its argument out loud. At the top, it comes down to who wants it more, and who has the strength of self to back that up, which reframes the whole emperor tier rather beautifully, I think. These aren't just people who lucked into powerful fruits. Plenty of people have powerful fruits and go nowhere. The emperors are the ones whose wills are large enough to fill an ocean, to press down on entire armies, to stand unbroken against the world's military and its hidden rulers. The fruit is the tool, the will is the person, and an emperor is, above all, a person whose will has grown so vast that the world reorganizes itself around the weight of it. That's the through line connecting the family man and the dragon and the clown and the rest of them, however different their powers and philosophies. Every one of them, in their own way, wanted their particular thing badly enough, and had the spine to hold that wanting against everything that pushed back. It also explains why the newest emperors can sit beside the old monsters without their vast fleets and territories. The rubber kid doesn't rule islands, but his will bent a dragon. The clown can't fight, but somehow the world keeps arranging itself around him regardless, almost as if reputation is its own kind of imposed will. The empires and the bounties and the crews are the outward trappings. The real currency at that altitude is the strength of a person's spirit, and Haki is just the name the story gives to that spirit when it grows heavy enough to move the world. So the next time you picture these 4 chairs at the top of the sea, don't picture them as a ranking of powers. Picture them as a ranking of wills. 4 people who each, in their own strange way, wanted something so completely that the world had no choice but to make room. That's what an emperor really is, underneath the flags and the fruits and the enormous numbers. A will too large to ignore. And on that thought, let's finally let the whole thing go quiet. So there they are, all of them, the whole strange procession of monarchs of an ocean nobody fully owns. I said at the very start that the funny thing about the 4 emperors is that nobody handed them the title. They just grew large enough that the world had to admit they mattered. And I think, having wandered through all of them now, that's still the thing I keep coming back to. There's no throne. There never was. Just 4 chairs that the biggest wills in the world keep filling and emptying, generation after generation, as the old giants fall and the new ones rise to take their places. And they have been falling. That's the quiet story underneath the whole night, isn't it? When we started, the old era felt permanent. 4 names that had defined the seas for decades. By the time we finished, most of those names were gone from the board. The family man who wanted nothing but sons laid to rest after a war he fought for one of them. The dragon who couldn't find a death worthy of him until the day he finally did. The matriarch of the living candy kingdom toppled beside her old crewmate on the same afternoon. 3 of the 4 old chairs emptied in the space of a few short years, an entire age clearing itself off the table to make room for whatever comes next. And into those empty chairs, the strangest new occupants, a patient schemer who took a fallen giant's power off his body and broke the oldest rule in the world to do it. A laughing kid in a borrowed straw hat who backed into the title while chasing something much simpler and much larger than power. A terrified clown propped up by people he's frightened of, holding one of the most feared seats in the world, essentially by accident and reputation. The idea of what an emperor even is has bent and shifted under them. It used to mean a vast fleet and a conquered country. Now it can mean a handful of friends and a will too big to measure. Same 4 chairs, completely different kinds of people sitting in them. Through all of it, one figure hasn't moved, the red-haired one, still there at the edge of every story, having watched every other version of the title come and go while never once giving up his own. The boy who was a shipmate of both a legend and a clown, the man who gave away his hat and his arm and ended a war with a sentence. Whatever the world is building toward, he's standing right in the middle of it. The last thread connecting the age of the old monsters to whatever the new one turns out to be. If you find yourself wondering about any of them as you drift off, wonder about him. He's the one the story keeps its secrets around most carefully, and I suspect that's on purpose, because that's the other thing this whole tour keeps circling. None of it's finished. The story is still being written, still unspooling its buried century and its ancient promises and its single mysterious letter that ties heroes and villains together across the generations. The road to the end of it runs directly through those 4 chairs. Whoever's sitting in them, when the world finally cracks open, its oldest secrets will be standing at the very centre of everything. And we don't know yet who that'll be, or what they'll find, or how the balance finally settles after all these years of wobbling, which is honestly the best possible place to leave it. Unfinished, still moving, a set of open questions rather than a closed book. I love that these 4 aren't a fixed hierarchy carved in stone. They're a living thing, always one great battle away from rearranging itself, a title that has to be re-earned by every generation that reaches for it. There's something oddly comforting in that, late at night. The idea that nothing at the top ever really stays put, that the biggest, most permanent-seeming powers in the world are underneath just people who wanted something badly enough for a while, until the next ones came along, wanting it more. The wheel turns. It always turns. The monsters of one age become the crewmates of the last one's monsters, and the fresh faces of the next, round and round. And the 4 chairs sit there through all of it, patient, waiting to be filled again. That's probably a good note to rest on. There's more to all of this, of course. Whole oceans of it. And I've got other corners of this world I'd like to wander through with you some other night. The buried century on its own could fill ours. The hero's own crew. The government's hidden rulers. The swordsman the story keeps promising us. Plenty of seas left to drift across. But that's for another time. For now, the emperors can keep their thrones that aren't thrones, out there in the new world, holding a third of the world's power between them, and mostly just leaving each other alone. The old ones can rest, and the new ones can grow into seats that don't quite fit them yet, and the red-haired one can keep watching from the edges with whatever he knows that he isn't telling. And you can let all of it go soft and distant now. The dragons and the earthquakes and the living suns and the clown who somehow made it to the top. It's a lot to hold. You don't have to hold any of it. Thanks for drifting through this one with me. Sleep well whenever you get there. The sea will still be here, and so will they whenever you feel like coming back.